Hey, Patreons, welcome back to the Spotlight here on the Secret Friends Unite Patreon network. This is our opportunity to talk to great creators in the genre world. And I am joined this fine evening by Mr. Steve Englehart. How are you today,
I'm
sir?
good. How are you doing?
Awesome. I'm doing well. No, I'm very glad that you're joining us. And flying solo, my partner Todd couldn't make it this time. So it's a little bit more of an intimate chat. So I'm totally down with that. But I always like to start things off with the most plain of questions. How did you find yourself into this world? How did you get started in comics?
It's a simple question. It's a long answer.
Take me through it. I'm here for it.
Well, I was, I read comics. I loved comics as a kid. I outgrew comics the way kids do, and then in college, um, in the early '60s, mid '60s, a guy shoved a Spider-Man in my hand and said, "You really need to read this." Why he did that to me, But I mean, um, I liked it. It was a Ditko. That's how early it was, Ditko. Mm.
Oh wow.
So I thought, I would get into comics at some point. But when I graduated college, this was Vietnam time, and I had to go in the army. And then one day, which for reasons that I made perfect sense at the time, but I find harder and harder to understand over time, um, I had no duty on Friday afternoon, and I was in Maryland. I was at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. So I just decided to go hop on a train and go up to New York and go to DC Comics, where I knew Neil Adams liked to hang out and work, and he was my favorite guy. So I went in. There wasn't a lot of fans. There weren't a lot of fans showing up at the companies, and right, it was still that early.
Wow.
But they said, "Well, let me check with Neil," and Neil said yes. And then I went back and talked with Neil, and showed him. Was trying to be an artist like him, and I showed him some of my stuff, and I said, when I get out of the army, um, maybe you would take me on? Question mark. And he said, "Why don't you start now?" And I said, "Because
Wow.
I'm in the army." And he said, "Well, can you come up every weekend?" And I said, "Yes, I can." And he said, "Well, then do that. Come up every Friday. We'll work here." And this is what actually happened. I mean, I worked with him Friday nights until like 1 in the morning, and then we'd go hit a deli and get some food. And then I'd go sleep.
Wow.
I'd go sleep on a couch at Columbia. I had friends at Columbia, and I was able to sleep in the student union uh, couch place, whatever. And then I'd go out to Neil's house on Saturday and work with him all day, and he would feed me, and I would play with his kids, and the
Oh.
whole thing. Um, this went on. There's even more to that, but the point of it is when I got out of the army, I went to New York. I had a published credit because Neil had insisted on putting my name on a story we did for Vampirella, so that I would have a published credit. And the cool thing about New York in those days was pretty much everybody who did comics was there, um, because you didn't have FedEx, you didn't have the internet, so you had to hand things to people. And so one of the requirements
Right.
was physically move to New York. Uh, and the cool thing about that was that meant everybody you knew in comics was there. And so you'd run into them in the office, at parties. It's like you got to know the entire comic book world, which was pretty cool for a guy just getting into it. And one of the people I got to know was Gary Friedrich, who wrote Sergeant Fury and Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. after Steranko and stuff like
Wow.
that. And he was like the lowest level editorial guy at Marvel. And one day he called me up and he said, "A stewardess was murdered in the apartment above mine.
Oh God.
And my wife is freaked out and she wants us to go to Missouri for the summer, where I'm from," says Gary. "Would you want to sit in for 6 weeks and take my slot at Marvel for 6 weeks?" And I almost said no, because I was living at that time up in Connecticut, 2 hours outside the city, which meant 2 hours on the train in and 2 hours on the train out every
Right.
day, right? So I almost said no, but I eventually told Roy Thomas when I went to talk to him. I said, "How about Monday through Thursday? Give me the weekend off." And he's like, "Sure, whatever." Because what did he care? Some guy's going to sit in for 6 weeks. But at the end of 6 weeks, Gary didn't want to come back. He liked it in Missouri. And so he had this story, a monster story, a 6-page monster story by Sid Shores, that he was supposed to dialogue, but he was so laid back that he didn't want to dialogue the 6-page story. So he sent it back to Marvel. And Roy looked around the room and, and he goes, you want to write this thing? And
Wow.
I was like, sure, sure. I love comics. I'll do whatever. Writing was not what I was, the road that I was on, etc. But I wrote it and I liked writing it, and they liked what I wrote. So then they were like, "Would you like to write some more?" And then and then that's how eventually I became a Marvel and other people's comic book writer. So, like I
Oh
said,
my
not a simple
gosh.
story. You can't put that in the
No, not at all.
in the business school handout about how you
Right.
get into things,
Right.
But I think, I mean, I
Right.
think a lot of people end up doing stuff because a door happened to open right at that time, and all
Absolutely.
that. Anyway, a lot of
Wow.
it was luck.
That's
Yeah, it
crazy.
is. A lot of it is just luck, but
Wow.
there you go.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm an old school Marvel guy, as you can tell. I position myself just so you could see my collection of West Coast Avengers figures directly behind
Yep.
me. I grew up in that era. I started reading Marvel comics in the early '80s. Licensed stuff at that time. It was Star Wars, and then it was Indiana Jones. Then Spider Man, kind of like your story. I got into probably '85, '86, but right around that time is when the second West Coast Avengers, the regular series, Volume 2 was dropping, and also your Vision the Scarlet Witch
Yeah.
maxi series, the 12-month series, because there had been a limited series,
Right.
I think, earlier in the
Right.
80s. Um, that was, I mean, that was such a conflux. I think I started West Coast Avengers with issue 12 or 13, which I got off of a spinner rack in a small town in Michigan where I live.
Hmm.
That summer, it was, yeah, it was. So I was swept away. But how did you find yourself? Because you had a long run on the Avengers in the '70s and the '80s. Um, the West Coast Avengers, was that your creation, or
No.
was that something you kind of picked up and ran
Yeah,
with?
I picked it up. I think it was created by Mark Grunwald, the editor, and Roger Stern,
Right.
the writer.
Such a
I
fan.
know Grunwald
Right.
created Mockingbird. I mean, or turned Bobby Chase into Mockingbird, and Grunwald was a cool guy. And he basically Hawkeye was Marvel's Green Arrow, so he wanted a Marvel's Black Canary, and thus Mockingbird. Roger did a 4-part thing, and then once again, isn't as long or complicated a story, but I had gotten out of comics by that time. I'd left comics. I was writing novels, and I was working actually. That led me to be a game designer at Atari, and I was working at Atari.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was working at Atari. I was done with comics, but I went down to San Diego that year to just to see friends and stuff, and both DC and Marvel came up and said, "Hey, would you like to do comics again?" And I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm designing games for Atari. And I got home that Sunday night, and my boss called me up and he said they just sold the company, and I think we're all going to get fired on Wednesday.
Oh man,
So
I've been there. I have been there, so I get it.
so on Monday morning, I called up Dick Giordano and Jim Shooter, and I said, well, actually, maybe And so I came back to do. I didn't want to work for one company this time because I'd been disappointed. So I was primarily a Marvel guy, but I also did Green Lantern for DC at the same time. But at Marvel, they said Mark Grunwald said, "I want you to write the West Coast Avengers because you did the Avengers, and I want you to write Vision and Witch because you did the Avengers." Um, and I've heard over the years that Roger wasn't real pleased with that, but I had nothing to do with it. I just walked in the door and they said, "This is," I mean, that's how they did stuff in those days. They just assigned you stuff. You didn't ask for anything or try to get any particular place. I was happy to write those 2 books. I didn't know that it would, that it upset Roger in the beginning, at least. Um, so I just jumped right back in to do that. Um, that's probably the answer to your question. I mean, I had West Coast Avengers and Vision Witch, and I started them off connected, and then they went their separate ways and so forth.
Right. Right. Any particular character moments, new characters, or really kind of breakout events that happen in that, let's say that first, 12 months when they were intertwined, or 2 years when they were intertwined, that really sticks with you, that you were really proud of?
Well, Wanda and the Vision having kids,
Right.
right? I had been Roy had started the whole romance between the two of them, and then I had this long run on the Avengers with Mantis and all this stuff, and it eventually ended up with Vision and Witch getting married. Then I left, then I came back, and they said do a Vision Witch book, and I thought, well, what do married people do? They have kids, you know. So
Yeah.
and of course, he's not anatomically prepared for that, but she can do magic. So,
Right.
it's like,
All kinds of
so
magic. Right.
I did this thing, and at the end of it, the kids were born, and um, it was a 12-issue limited series, so I wasn't able to continue with that particularly, although they did show up as guest stars in the West Coast Avengers. Um, I mean, I always say that I had no idea that Star-Lord would become anything, let alone what he became. I
Yeah.
never know where any of this stuff is gonna go. So I had no idea
Right.
that those kids would end up being, essential to the MCU, basically.
Right.
They're a through line through a lot of these storylines. Um, so that, so and doing the thing. I mean, doing the Vision Witch each issue a month apart in real time, tied to a holiday for that month, but also watching Wanda go through the 9 months
Right.
in order to put these kids in the world. So that was cool. And then the other thing,
Yeah.
I mean, from that era at the West Coast Avengers, uh, there were I, uh, there were a number of stories in there. The Lost in Space Time, where I had to like shuffle
Yeah.
6 different timelines all the time. So
Right.
that's fun as a
Right.
writer. I It turned out I liked
Yeah.
writing, and it's fun to kinda can you do that? And the other thing, of course, was when Mockingbird dropped the Phantom Rider off a
Oh.
cliff, right?
Justice is served.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that was, and then she lied about it, and Hawk eventually found out, and then they were estranged back together, and it was very soap opera-y through the run of that whole comic with their
yeah,
relationship, there's no
yeah.
doubt. Yeah. Gotcha. Awesome. Well, I'm a big Marvel guy, but I don't want to be so one-sided that I don't talk at all about DC Comics, because I mean, I love DC Comics as any comic fan does. What are some of your favorite moments from working in DC Comics?
Tell you the truth, there aren't an infinite number of them because DC is a very shady company
Oh my.
has been, at least.
Yeah,
I'm actually dealing with them now. Guy Gardner's going to be in the Superman movie, and so
absolutely.
right, so and it's a new regime. Jim Lee is running a much better ship, but previously I haven't had great experiences with the business end of DC. But
Gotcha.
in terms of the books, I was very happy with Green Lantern and Green Lantern Corps.
Yeah.
Guy Gardner to
Awesome. Yeah,
start
I'm a big
with,
fan.
then the whole Lantern team up thing, and just I was Joe Staten and I were really rolling on that book, and it was interesting because it was my one DC book. Meanwhile, I'm across town writing Scarlet Witch and later on Silver Surfer. I mean, other
Mhm.
things over there. Both companies. Both companies were totally aware that I was doing this, and they both in those days were you know interested in having me work for them, so they weren't going to say pick one or the other. um, so I'm happy with all the stuff that I did because I try to do it to the best of my ability, and if I feel that I
Right.
did that, then I feel like, okay, I'm happy with that. But Green Lantern, particularly had a the whole mythos, and the 3600 lanterns and the Guardians and the Samurons, and and the whole thing that Julie Schwartz put together when he started all this. That was really fun to play with. And Also, I came back right at the same time that they were doing Crisis, and so I decided that I should
Gotcha.
sort
Okay.
of have the Green Lantern Corps story be aware of that. And so
Mhm.
there was a big climax in Green Lantern 198, which was the same time as the last issue of Crisis, and then there was a Green Lantern
Oh,
200 2 months later, and then that became the Green Lantern Corps. I mean, so it was fun as a writer to like build things out of all those um, situations. And again, Giordano was a great guy. That was fine working for
yeah,
him. But there have been times,
I
when I
understand.
was like not happy with DC.
Yeah. I hear it. I mean, sometimes you got to remember that outside of the craft, it's a job, and we've
Right.
all had tough coworkers and bad jobs in general. So that it completely makes sense. I totally get it. Okay, so looking beyond Marvel, looking beyond DC to other work that you've done some license work. You've worked in some different corners. What's a proud creation or like a really memorable project that you worked on that didn't have to do with the big two?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, I mean, there might be others if I sit here long enough, but um, the Malibu stuff, the Strangers and
Sure.
Nightman, right? Um, I, they made a TV show out of Nightman. It was made for $1.25 an episode, but it was a TV show, you know,
Right,
right?
right.
So that was cool. What else did I? Well, I had fun. I mean, again, I have fun with all this stuff. I wouldn't say Jurassic Park was like one of the high points of my career, but it was a fun book. It was fun to figure out
Yeah,
what to
yeah.
do with those limited number of characters. And we had a new artist every 4 issues because Topps wanted to pretend that they kept having number ones. But
Right.
even though it was one long story, really, but we did have a different artist every 4 issues, so that was kind of fun to work with them. I mean, I like comics, so
Yeah,
anything that's
I hear
fun
you.
to do in comics is good with me. Trying to think. Nothing else is coming to mind, but it might, while
No,
we're
no, it's no
talking.
trouble.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Anything inside of DC and Marvel, or even that's maybe happened in the recent years, new events or whatever that you're like, oh boy, I would love to expand on that by this. Or I mean, do you find yourself keeping up? Are you still a reader of comics, like kind of big picture when it comes to Marvel and DC?
Not. I'm a big reader of comics, but I'm not really keeping up with the new stuff particularly. Um, I'm one of those guys. I've talked to other people who have the same thing. That once you've said to yourself, "Okay, who is the Scarlet Witch? Who is Captain America? Who is Hal Jordan?" and then committed yourself to like getting inside that guy's head and doing what it is, then it's hard to read other people's versions of it because then
Right. Yeah, I
you've
get
been
it.
so intimate with this guy that you go, yeah, that's not quite right. That's not quite, or maybe it is, but I wouldn't do it that way, or whatever. So between that and the fact that it became harder to get things sometimes. People would come up to me and they'd go, "You really need to read this book." And I go to the comic book store and it's sold out, right? And they
Yeah.
don't have it anymore, right? So I just sort of and also then I wrote novels for Tor, and was much more interested in prose at the time
Hmm.
than comics. Although I
Yeah.
find I really am a comic book writer. I like dialogue. I like to write dialogue and I like to do fast action, punchy sort of stories.
Yeah.
Writing scene descriptions in prose was never my favorite thing to do. So, but you learn from doing, right?
Right. James T. Kirk told us that. Absolutely. We learn by
Yeah.
doing. I'm a big Star Trek guy, if that somehow didn't get missed by my background here.
You said it was the
But
West Coast
well,
Avengers.
it can be two
Okay.
things, and Spider-Man,
Okay.
and Star Trek, or and Star Wars. But God, it's been absolutely great. It's been awesome to talk to you. What are some things that you're working on currently?
Well, I'm doing stuff now primarily for myself. I talked earlier about writers' challenges. I mean, I've done stuff where I go, I've never done this thing, and it would be tricky to do, so let's do that. That's kind of
Right.
I like
Right.
to write. I like to write, and as I say, I write stuff either as comic book scripts or as film scripts because they're basically the same thing. They're easy
Yeah.
enough to do one or the other. whichever. And when I write it, I think, well, okay, but none of it for the last 10 years there. I haven't written anything with the idea of, oh, I have to sell this, or I it's just like, so I have a bunch of series things and one shot movies and stuff just sort of sitting on my computer that are basically for me to have done. Could I make this happen? Yes, I did it, so that's good. um there's, what can I say? If I run into somebody who's interested in publishing it, then, you know let's talk. But I mean, I'm not in the commercial world anymore. I did a comic for kids with cancer. I've done
Awesome.
several of
Excellent.
them now, for two different companies. And the guy that I'm working with, the guy who's the artist on this, and was involved in setting up the whole project before I came on board. Um, he's still It's a commercial. He's got a commercial job that he has to take care of, right? So he's got to worry about, is this job coming in? Is the payment coming in? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which I'm more than happy not to um,
Right.
be worried about. It's just, I can do what I want to do, and if it goes somewhere, then that would be cool. And if
Right.
it doesn't, I
Gotcha.
still did what I wanted to do.
You did it your
Yeah,
way, like Frankie says. That's good
yeah.
stuff. That's wonderful. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. Thank you to all of our patrons for tuning in. If you're hearing this on our network feed, you can visit patreon.com/Secret Friends Unite. Try us out for 7 days for free, and hear great interviews like this one, and then stay on board for as little as $2 a month. Steve, have a great evening. Thank you so much for
You're
joining us,
welcome. Thank you.
and thank you. We'll see you out there.
This podcast is part of the Secret Friends Unite podcasting network, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast services around the galaxy, as well as video on our YouTube channel. You can support Secret Friends Unite by becoming a Patreon member, get bonus programs and more over at patreon.com/secretfriendsunite. Join our Discord community for even more discussions on all things geek. For all the latest updates on Secret Friends Unite, make sure to follow us on Threads at secret.friends.unite and visit secretfriendsunite.com. Find our merchandise at TeePublic and Redbubble. Thanks for listening, and may the Force live long and prosper.